Let's try this again. My connection went unstable, and I don't know. There wasn't anyone in here live, as there never is the first couple minutes when I do these. So I cut it off and tried again. We'll try this one more time. Dreams in the Witch House by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Whether the dreams brought on the fever or the fever brought on the dreams, Walter Gilman did not know. Behind everything crouched the brooding, festering horror of the ancient town and of the moldy, unhallowed garret gable where he wrote and studied and wrestled with figures and formulae when he was not tossing on the meager iron bed. His ears were growing sensitive to a preternatural and intolerable degree, and he had long ago stopped the cheap mantel clock whose ticking had come to seem like a thunder of artillery. At night, the subtle stirring of the black city outside, the sinister scurrying of rats in the wormy partitions, and the creaking of hidden timbers in the centuried house were enough to give him a sense of strident pandemonium. The darkness always teemed with unexplained sound, and yet he sometimes shook with fear lest the noises he heard should subside and allow him to hear certain other, fainter noises which he suspected were lurking behind them. He was in the changeless, legend-haunted city of Arkham, with its clustering gambrel roofs that sway and sag over attics where witches hid from the king's men in the dark olden days of the province. Nor was any spot in that city more steeped in macabre memory than the gable room which harbored him, for it was this house and this room which had likewise harbored old Keziah Mason, whose flight from Salem jail at the last no one was ever able to explain. And that was in 1692. The jailer had gone mad and babbled of a small, white-fanged, furry thing which scuttled out of Keziah's cell, and not even Cotton Mather could explain the curves and angles smeared on the gray stone walls with some red sticky fluid. Possibly Gilman ought not to have studied so hard. Non-Euclidean calculus and quantum physics are enough to stretch any brain, and when one mixes them with folklore, behind the ghoulish hints of the Gothic tales and the wild whispers of the chimney corner, one can hardly expect to be wholly free from mental tension. Gilman came from Haverhill, but it was only after he had entered college in Arkham that he began to connect his mathematics with the fantastic legends of elder magic. Something in the air of the hoary town worked obscurely on his imagination. The professors at Miskatonic had urged him to slacken up, and had voluntarily cut down his course at several points. Moreover, they had stopped him from consulting the dubious old books on forbidden secrets that were kept under lock and key in a vault at the university library. But all these precautions came late in the day, so that Gilman had some terrible hints from the dreaded Necronomicon of Abdul al-Hazred, the fragmentary Book of Eibon, and the suppressed Unersprechlichen Kulten of von Junst, to correlate with his abstract formulae on the properties of space and the linkage of dimensions known and unknown. He knew his room was in the old witch house. That, indeed, was why he had taken it. There was much in the Essex County records about Keziah Mason's trial, and what she had admitted under pressure to the court of Oyer and Terminer had fascinated Gilman beyond all reason. She had told Judge Hawthorne of lines and curves that could be made to point out directions leading through the walls of space to other spaces beyond, and had implied that such lines and curves were frequently used at certain midnight meetings in the dark valley of the white stone beyond Meadow Hill and on the unpeopled island in the river. She had spoken also of the black man, of her oath, and of her new secret name of Nahab. Then she had drawn those devices on the walls of her cell and vanished. Gilman believed strange things about Keziah, and had felt a queer thrill on learning that her dwelling was still standing after more than 235 years. When he heard the hushed Arkham whispers about Keziah's persistent presence in the old house and the narrow streets, about the irregular human tooth marks left on certain sleepers in that and other houses, about the childish cries heard near May Eve and Hallowmass, about the stench often noted in the old house's attic just after those dreaded seasons, and about the small, furry, sharp-toothed thing which haunted the moldering structure in the town and nuzzled people curiously in the black hours before dawn. He resolved to live in the place at any cost. A room was easy to secure, for the house was unpopular, hard to rent, and long given over to cheap lodgings. Gilman could not have told what he expected to find there, but he knew he wanted to be in the building, where circumstance had more or less suddenly given a mediocre old woman of the 17th century an insight into mathematical depths perhaps beyond the utmost modern delvings of Planck, Heisenberg, Einstein, and de Sitter. He studied the timber and plaster walls for traces of cryptic designs at every accessible spot where the paper had peeled, and within a week managed to get the eastern attic room where Keziah was held to have practiced her spells. It had been vacant from the first, for no one had ever been willing to stay there long, but the Polish landlord had grown wary about renting it. Yet nothing would ever happen to Gilman till about the time of the fever. No ghostly Keziah flitted through the somber halls and chambers. No small furry thing crept into his dismal eyrie to nuzzle him, and no record of the witch's incantations rewarded his constant search. Sometimes he would take walks through shadowy tangles of unpaved, musty-smelling lanes where eldritch brown houses of unknown age leaned and tottered and leered mockingly through narrow, small-paned windows. Here he knew strange things had happened once, and there was a faint suggestion behind the surface that everything of that monstrous past might not, at least in the darkest, narrowest, and most intricately crooked alleys, have utterly perished. He also rowed out twice to the ill-regarded island in the river, and made a sketch of the singular angles described by the moss-grown rows of grey-standing stones whose origin was so obscure and immemorial. Gilman's room was of good size but queerly irregular shape, the north wall slanting perceptibly inward from the outer to the inner end, while the low ceiling slanted gently downward in the same direction. Aside from an obvious rat hole and the signs of other stopped-up ones, there was no access, nor any appearance of a former avenue of access, to the space which must have existed between the slanting wall and the straight outer wall on the house's north side, though a view from the exterior showed where a window had been boarded up at a very remote date. The loft above the ceiling, which must have had a slanting floor, was likewise a loft above the rest of the attic. He found vestiges of a bygone aperture tightly and heavily covered with ancient planking and secured by the stout wooden pegs common in colonial carpentry. No amount of persuasion, however, could induce the stolid landlord to let him investigate either of these two closed spaces. As time wore along, his absorption in the irregular wall and ceiling of his room increased, for he began to read into the odd angles a mathematical significance which seemed to offer vague clues regarding their purpose. Old Keziah, he reflected, might have had excellent reasons for living in a room with peculiar angles, for was it not through certain angles that she claimed to have gone outside the boundaries of the world of space we know? His interest gradually veered away from the unplumbed voids beyond the slanting surfaces, since it now appeared that the purpose of those surfaces concerned the side he was already on. The touch of brain fever and the dreams began early in February. For some time, apparently, the curious angles of Gilman's room had been having a strange, almost hypnotic effect on him, and as the bleak winter advanced he had found himself staring more and more intently at the corner where the down-slanting ceiling met the inward-slanting wall. About this period his inability to concentrate on his formal studies worried him considerably, his apprehensions about the mid-year examinations being very acute. But the exaggerated sense of hearing was scarcely less annoying. Life had become an insistent and almost unendurable cacophony, and there was that constant, terrifying impression of other sounds, perhaps from regions beyond life, trembling on the very brink of audibility. So far as concrete noises went, the rats in the ancient partitions were the worst. Sometimes their scratching seemed not only furtive, but deliberate. When it came from beyond the slanting north wall, it was mixed with a sort of dry rattling, and when it came from the sentry-closed loft above the slanting ceiling, Gilman always braced himself, as if expecting some horror which only bided its time before descending to engulf him utterly. The dreams were wholly beyond the pale of sanity, and Gilman felt that they must be a result, jointly, of his studies in mathematics and in folklore. He had been thinking too much about the vague regions which his formulae told him must lie beyond the 3 dimensions we know, and about the possibility that old Keziah Mason, guided by some influence past all conjecture, had actually found the gate to those regions. The yellowed country records containing her testimony and that of her accusers were so damnably suggestive of things beyond human experience, and the descriptions of the darting little furry object which served as her familiar were so painfully realistic despite their incredible details. That object, no larger than a good-sized rat and quaintly called by the townspeople Brown Jenkin, seemed to have been the fruit of a remarkable case of sympathetic herd delusion, for in 1692 no less than 11 persons had testified to glimpsing it. There were recent rumors, too, with a baffling and disconcerting amount of agreement. Witnesses said it had long hair and the shape of a rat, but that its sharp-toothed, bearded face was evilly human, while its paws were like tiny human hands. It took messages betwixt old Keziah and the devil, and was nursed on the witch's blood, which it sucked like a vampire. Its voice was a kind of loathsome titter, and it could speak all languages. Of all the bizarre monstrosities in Gilman's dreams, nothing filled him with greater panic and nausea than this blasphemous and diminutive hybrid, whose image flitted across his vision in a form 1,000-fold more hateful than anything his waking mind had deduced from the ancient records and the modern whispers. Gilman's dreams consisted largely in plunges through limitless abysses of inexplicably colored twilight and bafflingly disordered sound, abysses whose material and gravitational properties and whose relation to his own entity he could not even begin to explain. He did not walk or climb, fly or swim, crawl or wriggle, yet always experienced a mode of motion partly voluntary and partly involuntary. Of his own condition he could not well judge, for sight of his arms, legs, and torso seemed always cut off by some odd disarrangement of perspective. But he felt that his physical organization and faculties were somehow marvelously transmuted and obliquely projected, though not without a certain grotesque relationship to his normal proportions and properties. The abysses were by no means vacant, being crowded with indescribably angled masses of alien-hued substance, some of which appeared to be organic while others seemed inorganic. A few of the organic objects tended to awake vague memories in the back of his mind, though he could form no conscious idea of what they mockingly resembled or suggested. In the later dreams, he began to distinguish separate categories into which the organic objects appeared to be divided, and which seemed to involve in each case a radically different species of conduct pattern and basic motivation. Of these categories, one seemed to him to include objects slightly less illogical and irrelevant in their motions than the members of the other categories. All the objects, organic and inorganic alike, were totally beyond description or even comprehension. Gilman sometimes compared the inorganic masses to prisms, labyrinths, clusters of cubes and planes, and cyclopean buildings, and the organic things struck him variously as groups of bubbles, octopi, centipedes, living Hindu idols, and intricate arabesques roused into a kind of Ophidian animation. Everything he saw was unspeakably menacing and horrible, and whenever one of the organic entities appeared by its motions to be noticing him, he felt a stark, hideous fright which generally jolted him awake. Of how the organic entities moved, he could tell no more than of how he moved himself. In time, he observed a further mystery, the tendency of certain entities to appear suddenly out of empty space or to disappear totally with equal suddenness. The shrieking, roaring confusion of sound which permeated the abysses was past all analysis as to pitch, timbre, or rhythm, but seemed to be synchronous with vague visual changes in all the indefinite objects, organic and inorganic alike. Gilman had a constant sense of dread that it might rise to some unbearable degree of intensity during one or another of its obscure, relentlessly inevitable fluctuations. But it was not in these vortices of complete alienage that he saw Brown Jenkin. That shocking little horror was reserved for certain lighter, sharper dreams which assailed him just before he dropped into the fullest depths of sleep. He would be lying in the dark, fighting to keep awake, when a faint lambent glow would seem to shimmer around the centuried room, showing in a violet mist the convergence of angled planes which had seized his brain so insidiously. doctor. I did not know. Where is my water? There it is. There it is. The horror would appear to pop out of the rat hole in the corner and patter toward him over the sagging, wide planked floor with evil expectancy in its tiny, bearded human face. But mercifully, this dream always melted away before the object got close enough to nuzzle him. It had hellishly long, sharp canine teeth. Gilman tried to stop up the rat hole every day, but each night the real tenants of the partitions would gnaw away the obstruction, whatever it might be. Once he had the landlord nail tin over it, but the next night the rats gnawed a fresh hole, in making which they pushed or dragged out into the room a curious little fragment of bone. Gilman did not report his fever to the doctor, for he knew he could not pass the examinations if ordered to the college infirmary when every moment was needed for cramming. As it was, he failed in Calculus D and Advanced General Psychology, though not without hope of making up lost ground before the end of the term. It was in March. Yes, Pywacket. Oh my God, why are you coming back in and pushing my door open? I need that closed, Pie. You can't just come and go, buddy. I'm going to shoot you with the water gun. Hey, Tim, how are you? Yes, Pywacket. I love you too, buddy. Gilman did not report his fever to the doctor, for he knew he could not pass the examinations if ordered to the college infirmary when every moment was needed for cramming. As it was, he failed in Calculus D and Advanced General Psychology, though not without hope of making up lost ground before the end of the term. It was in March when the fresh element entered his lighter preliminary dreaming. It was in March when the fresh element entered his lighter preliminary dreaming, and the nightmare shape of Brown Jenkin began to be companioned by the nebulous blur which grew more and more to resemble a bent old woman. This addition disturbed him more than he could account for, but finally he decided that it was like an ancient crone whom he had twice actually encountered in the dark tangle of lanes near the abandoned wharves. On those occasions, the evil, sardonic, and seemingly unmotivated stare of the beldame had set him almost shivering, especially the first time, when an overgrown rat darting across the shadowed mouth of a neighboring alley had made him think irrationally of Brown Jenkin. Now, he reflected, those nervous fears were being mirrored in his disordered dreams. That the influence of the old house was unwholesome, he could not deny, but traces of his early morbid interest still held him there. He argued that the fever alone was responsible for his nightly fantasies, and that when the touch abated, he would be free from the monstrous visions. Those visions, however, were of abhorrent vividness and convincingness, and whenever he awaked, he retained a vague sense of having undergone much more than he remembered. He was hideously sure that in unrecalled dreams he had talked with both Brown Jenkin and the old woman, and that they had been urging him to go somewhere with them and to meet a third being of greater potency. Hi. Don't make me shoot you with the water gun, buddy. Okay? That was a warning shot. That was your one warning. You can go out, but you can't come back in. I need the door shut. Don't cry. Just don't fuck with me while I'm streaming. You know better. Don't be bad. Okay? Pi wants me to stop streaming. She knows I've been going too long today and that I should eat something, and so she's insisting on coming in and out of the closed door over and over. It's all right, Pi Wacket. Toward the end of March, he began to pick up in his mathematics, though other studies bothered him increasingly. He was getting an intuitive knack for solving Riemannian equations, and astonished Professor Upham by his comprehension of fourth dimensional and other problems which had floored all the rest of the class. One afternoon, there was a discussion of possible freakish curvatures in space. Oh, you want treats now? Okay, we'll do that. And then the next time I'm going to shoot you, okay? What is this? Do you want treats, huh? What are they, actually? Where did I put them? What do we got there? No, don't play with that. Where are the cat treats? Here we are. Right? Is that what you want? Yeah? There you go. One afternoon, there was a discussion of possible freakish curvatures in space and of theoretical points of approach or even contact between our part of the cosmos and various other regions as distant as the farthest stars or the transgalactic gulfs themselves, or even as fabulously remote as the tentatively conceivable cosmic units beyond the whole Einsteinian space-time continuum. Gilman's handling of this theme filled everyone with admiration, even though some of his hypothetical illustrations caused an increase in the always plentiful gossip about his nervous and solitary eccentricity. What made the students shake their heads was his sober theory that a man might, given math, to any other celestial body, which might lie at one of an infinity of specific points in the cosmic pattern. Such a step, he said, would require only two stages. First, a passage out of the three-dimensional sphere we know, and second, a passage back to the three-dimensional sphere at another point, perhaps one of infinite remoteness. That this could be accomplished without loss of life was in many cases conceivable. Any being from any part of three-dimensional space could probably survive in the fourth dimension, and its survival of the second stage would depend upon what alien part of three-dimensional space it might select for its re-entry. Denizens of some planets might be able to live on certain others, even planets belonging to other galaxies, or to similar dimensional phases of other space-time continua, though of course there must be vast numbers of mutually uninhabitable, even though mathematically juxtaposed bodies or zones of space. It was also possible that the inhabitants of a given dimensional realm could survive entry to many unknown and incomprehensible realms of additional or indefinitely multiplied dimensions, be they within or outside the given space-time continuum, and that the converse would be likewise true. This was a matter for speculation, though one could be fairly certain that the type of mutation involved in a passage from any given dimensional plane I told you to stop, Pi. You have to stop, okay? Don't make me shoot you again. She went rushing under the bed and started batting a toy around. That's what that noise was. All right, I'm going to open the door and you can go out, but you better not scratch to get back in, Pi Wacket. Zoe fled because Zoe's just scared I'm going to shoot her with the water gun like on Spac. Pi's hiding under the bed because Pi doesn't want to stop being disruptive because she's a monster. I love her. But she is a monster. Yeah, Zoe just fled. Zoe just was like, when I opened the door to give Pi one last chance to leave, Pi's hiding under the bed so she can come out and be disruptive as soon as I start reading again. Zoe laughed. She's like, no. I streamed for like 5.5 hours earlier because we had the watch party for Gobblefoot. So Pie Waggit's trying to be good. Like she's trying to tell me, like, you've been doing this too long. You need to eat something and get some sleep. She's right. It's all right. 10 more minutes, I'm out. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, Tim, is like, there's still a live streaming dynamic. So I try to make sure I read for more than an hour so that people who are falling asleep and drifting in and out can come in here for like 5 to 15 minutes. Like, I don't expect many or anyone to hang out for the whole time. Hey, some dude, how are you? Yeah, I figure anyone who actually wants to hear the whole story I re-upload them so you can listen to them later. But for like when I do it live late at night, it's for atmosphere and ASMR for sure, and hanging out a little bit. But that's why I keep this like library hush in my voice when I get distracted during these, and I try to keep it on topic. Gilman could not be very clear about his. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna finish. I'm gonna back up to the top of the paragraph. Yeah, some dude, hang in there, man. It was also possible that the inhabitants of a given dimensional realm could survive entry to many unknown and incomprehensible realms of additional or indefinitely multiplied dimensions, be they within or outside the given space-time continuum, and that the converse would be likewise true. This was a matter for speculation, though one could be fairly certain that the type of mutation involved in a passage from any given dimensional plane to the next higher plane would not be destructive of biological integrity as we understand it. Gilman could not be very clear about his reasons for this last assumption. That's a leap. But his haziness here was more than overbalanced by his clearness on other complex points. Professor Upham especially liked his demonstration of the kinship of higher mathematics to certain phases of magical lore transmitted down the ages from an ineffable antiquity, human or pre-human, whose knowledge of the cosmos and its laws was greater than ours. So, yeah, this is very dubious. I'm going to explain why this is dubious. If you up a level dimensionally, you are almost certainly going to be injured conceptually. I don't know why he intuits it would be otherwise, but it's like this. This is the flatland explanation. Like, a plane is a two-dimensional object, right? 2 dimensions. So, a two-dimensional animal, right? Let's say that circle is a two-dimensional animal. Because we are three-dimensional and we are outside that two-dimensional space, we can look down into and see inside that two-dimensional animal. The inside of the circle would be where its organs and stuff are, right? The outside is actually the entire outside surface of the animal, right? And the inside is where the organs and stuff are. So a four-dimensional creature would be able to look down from outside three-dimensional space and see our internal organs and stuff like it was laid out flat. And so if we somehow stepped into a four-dimensional space, all of our organs would be exposed to whatever's in that space. Like there's no internal, external. I don't know why I followed that so quickly. It's because I've read Flatland, which is the explanation of this theory. And I bet Lovecraft got that from Flatland too. He did pinpoint that's you can't travel in four-dimensional space, you'll rupture. Or something will like eat the insides out of you. Um, this was a matter for speculation, though one could be fairly certain that the type of mutation involved in a passage from any given dimensional plane to the next higher plane would not be destructive of biological integrity as we understand it. Gilman could not be very clear about his reasons for this last assumption, but his haziness here was more than overbalanced by his clearness on other complex points. I really don't. I've read this story before, but I still caught that really quick, what he was saying there. Professor Upham especially liked his demonstration of the kinship of higher mathematics to certain phases of magical lore, transmitted down the ages from an ineffable antiquity, human or pre-human, whose knowledge of the cosmos and its laws was greater than ours. Around the 1st of April, Gilman worried considerably because his slow fever did not abate. He was also troubled by what some of his fellow lodgers said about his sleepwalking. It seemed that he was often absent from his bed, and that the creaking of his floor at certain hours of the night was remarked by the man in the room below. This fellow also spoke of hearing the tread of shod feet in the night, but Gilman was sure he must have been mistaken in this, since shoes as well as other apparel were always precisely in place in the morning. One could develop all sorts of aural delusions in this morbid old house. For did not Gilman himself, even in daylight, now feel certain that noises other than rat scratchings came from the black voids beyond the slanting wall and above the slanting ceiling? Some dude, yeah, we watched Gobblefoot on stream, yeah. Uh, in the Discord. We had a watch party in the Discord, and Jelly was voice live, and Matt the director was voice live, and a couple other fans came in. Minji, the Korean girl, was there live. Certified Ripper. But mostly Matt and I talked over his movie. Yeah, it was fun. I think I named everyone who was in there except for randos wandering by in the street. We'll do more of that watch party like that. That enables full scope film school watching in the Discord. So we'll do some more of that. We'll figure some things out. Um, um, and then after that, Jelly wanted to play her songs on flute because she had us on the voice channel and we could hear her. But then she never decided she was playing them good enough, really. She kept muting herself and practicing the song again and then being like, wait. Which wasn't as fun as watching the movie. But I'm not going to discourage any kid from playing any music anytime. It's sort of my stance there. Like, no discouragement, especially from the position I'm in. Okay, where was I? Around the 1st of April, Gilman worried considerably because his slow fever did not abate. Oh, right. And the shoes are always in the same place, and the oral delusions, rat scratchings. His pathologically sensitive ears began to listen for faint footfalls in the immemorially sealed loft overhead, and sometimes the illusion of such things was agonizingly realistic. However, he knew that he had actually become a somnambulist, for twice at night his room had been found vacant, though with all his clothing in place. Of this he had been assured by Frank Elwood, the one fellow student whose poverty forced him to room in this squalid and unpopular house. Elwood had been studying in the small hours and had come up for help on a differential equation, only to find Gilman absent. It had been rather presumptuous of him to open the unlocked door after knocking had failed to rouse a response, but he had needed the help very badly and thought that his host would not mind a gentle prodding awake. On neither occasion, though, had Gilman been there, and when told of the matter, he wondered where he could have been wandering, barefoot and with only his night clothes on. He resolved to investigate the matter if reports of his sleepwalking continued, and thought of sprinkling flour on the floor of the corridor to see where his footsteps might lead. The door was the only conceivable egress, for there was no possible foothold outside the narrow window. As April advanced, Gilman's fever-sharpened ears were disturbed by the whining prayers of a superstitious loom fixer named Joe Mazurowitz, who had a room on the ground floor. Mazurowitz had told long, rambling stories about the ghost of old Keziah and the furry, sharp-fanged, nuzzling thing, and had said he was so badly haunted at times that only his silver crucifix, given him for the purpose by Father Iwanicki of St. Stanislaus's church, could bring him relief. I think he's trying to make up Polish names and they're not quite on point. Mazurowicz is Mazurewicz. And Iwanicki, Iwanicki. Sometimes I think Lovecraft makes up names and gets words slightly wrong, like sort of made up, semi-made up words. Because he's working fast. And it's close enough for pulp magazine publication, not an educated audience. So if he gets a word slightly wrong, like if he can't remember the difference between impecunious and impecuniary, stuff like that, he does that fairly often, where it'll be a slightly made up word and it's like, yeah, it's close enough, like unnamableness, stuff like that. You know, I don't know why I think walking away will make it quieter when I cough. Usually I pause it when I pause it, mute it when I have a coughing fit. But it's one of the reasons I think that these reading streams are good for me. Is that I have a couple of coughing fits towards the beginning, and then later, like I feel like the oxygen supply is smoothing out. Like whatever's wrong with my lungs, this is good for it. Imagine he starts adding Latin words. Some dude, he did make up some Latin in one of the stories I read. Like my Latin isn't real good. I had fluent Latin when I was in like 9th, 10th grade. I was serious about Latin. And he had something slightly off. Like his Latin advisor was not 100%. His Latin advisor had high school Latin, but I don't remember where it was. And he made up something that was Aramaic too, or it was supposed to be like biblical. And he had quoted an Aramaic bit of the New Testament in the same passage, and it's like I don't think he knows a damn thing about the Bible. I think he grew up atheist. Like it seems like it with him. Like he just does not have any. He hadn't invested in Christian mythology, like at all. I don't know. Like I've been saying, one of the interviews I would like to do, I'd like to get St. Joshi in here. St. Joshi is the by far the leading expert on H.P. Lovecraft. He's written biographies, edited anthologies, gone through personal papers. Joshi has really excellent taste in weird fiction. He likes a lot of the same writers I do, like the same obscure writers that me and Lovecraft liked. But I would love to talk to him about some of the recurrent points in Lovecraft. The Russian guy in here that I worked on one of those Byron movies with. Oh, some dude, Iskanov's movies. Well, I'd love to watch his movies in the Discord. They're pretty extreme. We didn't actually work on a movie. I reviewed his movies and wrote an article about him. I knew him. He put his personal email address in the end credits of Visions of Suffering, and so I just started hanging out with him online because I liked his crazy movies. And then I met Byro later. Andrei Iskanov, he makes great movies. Visions of Suffering is amazing. Yeah, Mazurowicz. I mean, sort of a real Polish name, but sort of not. And what's the other one? I just can't even tell exactly how I'm supposed to say it. Iwanicki. Ivanicki. It seems like he wanted ethnic Eastern European, like, and they're supposed to be Catholic, they're supposed to be Polish or something, but like wasn't a phone book in the room. So and this was way pre-internet. um, As April advanced, Gilman's fever-sharpened ears were disturbed by the whining prayers of a superstitious loom fixer named Joe Mazurowicz, who had a room on the ground floor. Mazurowicz had told long, rambling stories about the ghost of old Keziah and the furry, sharp-fanged, nuzzling thing, and had said he was so badly haunted at times that only his silver crucifix, given him for the purpose by Father Iwanicki of St. Stanislaus's church, could bring him relief. Also, who is St. Stanislaus? Is that a real guy? I mean, there's a lot of saints. I was raised Jewish, so I don't really know. I'm on shaky ground here talking about it at all. Now he was praying because the witch's Sabbath was drawing near. May Eve was Walpurgis night, when hell's blackest evil roamed the earth and all the slaves of Satan gathered for nameless rites and deeds. It was always a very bad time in Arkham, even though the fine folks up in Miskatonic Avenue and High and Saltonstall streets pretended to know nothing about it. There would be bad doings, and a child or two would probably be missing. Joe knew about such things, for his grandmother in the old country had heard tales from her grandmother. It was wise to pray and count one's beads at this season. For 3 months, Keziah and Brown Jenkin had not been near Joe's room, nor near Paul Choynski's room. Choynski, Choynski. Nor anywhere else. And it meant no good when they